Welcome back to the TimCo Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. In this video, we're going to be publishing our WPF project to Azure Storage so we can provide people a download link for our project. We'll also be making sure that it can be easily deployed to a computer by including .NET Core and making it a one-file install. There's going to be no MSIN files. It's just one exe. You run it. It will have .NET Core already built in. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, those of you who are Patreon members at the $5 per month level or higher, make sure to head on over to get the source code for today's video, as well as a copy of the command parameters I'll be using in this video. Now, if you're not familiar with this course, welcome. This course focuses on building a real application. Now, this is not a tutorial necessarily on how to do these topics. This is practice for what you've already learned, or mostly what you've learned. Now, that doesn't mean you're gonna know everything in this video, but you should probably at least have a good foundation in some of these topics. If you don't, I have a lot of videos that cover a lot of these topics on this channel. Watch the tutorials, practice what you learn, and then this is taking that practice and putting the pieces together into a whole application. If you want to catch up from the beginning, I do have a course on my IamTimCorey.com site. That's phase 1. We'll have phase 2 on there pretty soon, but phase 1 is there so you can get kind of a head start with some source code for every lesson and ad-free videos and all the rest. Like I said, phase 2 will go there soon, but in the meantime, on YouTube are all the videos. I don't hide anything on YouTube. So make sure if you want to get the free version of it, start from the beginning on YouTube and watch all the way through. There's a playlist for it and you can get started, okay? Either way, I'd appreciate if you give this video a thumbs up, a like, comment down below what you want to see added to this video. All those things help with the algorithm and they help promote this content. All right, let's head on over to the browser. And this is our Azure Devops repository. This is where we are managing our projects. We have our source code, but this is where we manage our project. And what we're gonna do today is we've already got a build pipeline in place. This is our build, and then we have our release pipeline as well. We're gonna change both of these so we can actually change how our executable file is built, and then we're going to publish it to Azure. Let's actually go to Azure first. This is our Azure dashboard. We're gonna create a new resource here because I wanna start off by building the place that it's going to land. So a new resource, and what we wanna have is storage. So down here, storage account. Let's get an Azure Storage resource. We already have our, we should have a TimCo in here. Yep, TimCo Resource Group. I was missing it. Okay, and then the storage name, this is the name of our storage account. Let's just call this TimCo Storage. All one word is fine. And I'm not sure if it allows you to do capital letters. Nope, just lowercase letters and numbers. So you have to have it all lowercase, no underscores. Location, East US 2 is fine for me. Performance standard. Account type is storage version 2. And we're gonna have just locally redundant storage. Let's kind of reduce that need. Actually, we just need blob storage. Now, there's a lot of stuff in Azure Storage you can look at, but if you go to account type and look at storage account kinds, this will give you more information about the different storage accounts and what they do and what the different versions are about. It should. And it looks like this is just how to create it, which isn't quite right. But up here we have what is blob storage and comparison. So Azure blobs, and here's where it explains what they are. And there should be, let's just do this. Azure Pricing Calculator. This is where I usually go to look at information about something. So we're going to do a storage account. So let's add a storage account down here. And we're going to say, choose your region, just because it may be different for your region versus my region. So make sure you choose that. And we're doing blob storage, standard tier, version 2, local redundant storage, hot access. And right now, it's saying that it's going to cost me $19.44 a month based upon the standard numbers. Now, this is 1 terabyte of storage. I don't need anywhere near that much. Let's do 1 gigabyte of storage. And that means our operations probably reduced by at least 1 0. And retrieval, again, reduced by 1 0. The end result of 1 gigabyte of storage with even this many operations. Now, that's a lot of operations. So even that, I'm going to be paying 12 cents a month for my storage, okay? So this is not a lot of stuff, and you only pay for what you use. So you don't pay for, 1 terabyte if you're not using 1 terabyte. So upfront cost is 0, monthly cost is 12 cents. So I can live with that. I think that that's a reasonable storage amount. Let's go ahead and review and create. And we'll hit create. It's going to create storage for me for my files. And what Azure Storage Blob Storage is it's basically an unstructured bucket. You just dump things in. It's not going to have the folder structure that you might like. You can pay a little more for that. I want to keep this as cheap as possible. I want to make sure that Azure DevOps is okay with it. Let's pin this to the dashboard. Because if it's not okay that we can upgrade it, because we're not exactly spending a whole lot of money here, but I think this should be fine. Azure Storage, we have containers. Then in here, we don't have any containers yet. Okay, so I'm going a little fast here, but this is an overview, okay? A container is a bucket. And in that bucket, you have just all your files. You don't have an organization pattern, it's just files. And then what you do is you can link to those or get an actual hard-coded link to that file even after you version it. So there's some pretty cool stuff you can do with that. We're going to use it just as a place to store our executable file, which is going to be a 1 file application, meaning it's going to say, our Windows app name.exe, and that's it. It'll have .NET Core built into it, and it's going to have all the DLLs, the configuration even. It'll all be inside that exe, and that will be the self-contained file for our application. That means we don't have to create an installer. There's no MSI file needed or MSIX file because it's 1 file. So we can just copy and paste that wherever you want to go and run it. Now, there's some things we have to work on with the config file, make sure we get that just right so it can go from computer to computer without having to be changed. But we'll work on that probably in the next video. But for now, we have containers. This is those buckets. You can create multiple containers inside of your storage account. We're going to create 1 container, and this is going to allow anonymous read access for blobs only. So no one can list the directory. They can just, if we give them a URL for a specific blob, which a blob is a file, if we give them a URL for a specific file, they can access that file, read only. That's all they'll have access to externally. So this looks kind of scary. It's got a warning thing here, but this is just saying that you're setting these permissions up here. That's all it's saying. So it's saying blobs can be read by anonymous request, but the container data is not available. anonymous clients cannot enumerate the blobs within the container, meaning you can't just say, give me the whole container full of files, and it lists all the files that are available to them. We don't want that. We just want the one file we give them access to. That way it's kind of like an obfuscation thing. It's not the same thing as not allowing them access to those files, because if they have the correct names, they could technically get access to them, but it is a little more obfuscation and not just kind of saying, here's all of our stuff. So let's call this, how about applications? Plural, lowercase, advanced, we don't need to set an encryption scope. So now we have a container called applications. Inside this container, we could manually upload files. We can overwrite them if they already exist. And that would put the file in here and give us the ability to access that file. We're gonna come back to this when we are done with our pipeline. So, and by the way, right now, I'm not paying anything for this because there's no files in use. So it's not like I'm getting charged yet. I'm only going to get charged when I actually use it. So when I said a gigabyte of storage, that's only if I actually use that much. I won't be using anywhere near that much. So this is a really cheap storage solution. I'll probably pay a penny, maybe two, throughout this entire process for this. Okay, pipelines. So we need to get a file into that storage container. Let's start off with our build pipeline. We're gonna click on it. We're gonna edit it. And right now we have is this Microsoft build, MS build project, but I wanna move to a .NET publish instead, because this is gonna allow me to have a few more options in the command line. The nice thing with .NET publish, notice it says .NET publish, and then here's your command line arguments. Well, you can run this command, .NET publish, and then right afterwards just put these command lines, parameters. You can run that on the command line on your machine, as long as you have the .NET Core SDK installed, which you should if you have Visual Studio, the full version for Windows, installed on your machine. If you have Mac or Linux, then you'd have to install the SDK manually, but then you can still run these commands on the command line. The benefit here is you can test these on your local machine without having to set up a whole build process. You just test the commands, figure out the ones that work the way you want them to work, and then once you've done that, then you just create the task in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable this task. I'm disabling instead of deleting because of the fact that I want to make sure that I can get back to that if I mess something up. I'll delete this after it works. I'm going to right click on this .NET Publish and say clone. And this copy right here, I'm going to move this down to where my WPF project is. Instead of saying .NET Publish copy, we're going to say build WPF project. Now, I'm saying build for the display name, even though it's technically doing a publish, because it's building the exe file. I'm calling the publish when I actually take that exe file and put it into an artifact, that zip file. So this is a publish, and it's not a web project. So what's the path to the project? Well, I already have that in here. So let's copy that. That's no reason not to delete it. Paste it. Arguments, well, we're not going to build for Linux because you cannot build a WPF project for Linux. And the reason why is because even though it's .NET Core, which .NET Core is cross-platform, but it's a WPF project, Windows Presentation Foundation. The W stands for Windows. It is still, even with the .NET Core version, it is baked into Windows. It's tied to the Windows DLLs. And it's not something that's going to change. It's not going to be down the road we're going to find out, oh, WPF now runs on Linux. It's not going to happen because it's just too tightly tied to Windows. If they were to try and break those couplings, then it's kind of like saying, you know what, this car is great, but I really want a different, different body and a different motor and different transmission and drivetrain, and but that mirror is great. And so you end up putting a whole new car under your old mirror. Well, that's kind of what you'd have to do to get WPF to work cross-platform. So instead, that's where .NET 5 and .NET 6 are going to move into the codename MAUI, .NET MAUI, which is Multiple Application User Interface, I believe is what the acronym stands for. That's why it's called MAUI. What that does, it allows cross-platform development for the desktop primarily. That's the big new deal. But it'll be desktop, web, and mobile cross-platform with one code base. Now, that's going to come out officially. It's going to come out in November of 2021. So if you're asking, when are you going to do videos on that, Tim? Probably near, October or November of 2021. I'm not going to do them earlier than that because it's going to change way too much. But that's what's coming, but that's not WPF. That's actually based upon Xamarin. So just so you know, that's where that's going. We're not going to see WinForms or WPF moved over to be able to run on Mac or Linux. Sorry, a little bit of side trail there. I want to point that out. Okay, so what are our build arguments here for this? Well, I want to say -p : publish single file equals true. Now what that's going to do is it's going to say, instead of publishing your exe file and your DLL file and your config file and any other files you have, plus all the other DLLs you depend on from NuGet packages, I want you to publish all of that, wrap it all up into one executable file. Next, we're going to say, and that's what true equals. And then next, we're going to say -p : publish trimmed equals true. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to say, hey, you know what? I want to make sure that we're going to publish this with the .NET Core as well. So you don't have to have the .NET Core runtime installed on the machine in order for this to run. But I don't want all of .NET Core because some stuff I'm not using. Now, I'm probably using a lot of it, but maybe not all of it. I know not all of it. So I don't want to bring along the stuff that I don't need. That's where the trimmed comes in. It looks at your application and says, what are the things that you're calling? And it says, okay, that's calling this and this is calling that, but these things over here aren't being called in the .NET Core. Therefore, we don't need those in the final build. So it does some tree shaking to figure out how that all comes about. Okay, we do need to specify the runtime, -- so two of them, runtime space win-x64. This is where I'm saying this is going to run on the Windows platform, which we know it has to because it's WPF, and it's going to be this is a 64-bit build, meaning it's going to be targeted for 64-bit machines. In general, machines today are 64-bit. We haven't really had 32-bit machines in a while. So you're pretty safe doing this. If you really wanted to have a 32-bit version, just change the x64 to x86 and you'll be good to go. And yes, the larger number means smaller bits. So, all right. Now we have one more -- self - contained space true. And what this is going to say is, again, self-contained means that we are bringing .NET Core with our executable. So we're not going to have our executable and then hope that the user has .NET Core installed on their machine. Instead, we're going to bring .NET Core with us so that we know for sure it will run on the user's machine. This will make our executable much larger, which is where this trimmed comes in, is it's trying to shrink it back down some. But don't panic over that. That's okay, because that is security. That is knowing the user has the runtime on the machine. If you don't do that, then you have to make sure that the particular runtime that you depend on is installed on every machine where that executable will run. I don't like to trust that, so I prefer to have it built in to my executable. So these are all the commands you need. They are space sensitive. Make sure you have double dashes, whereas versus single in the right spots. We don't want to, I don't think we want to zip this up. So this will now create for us, if we zip it, it's a zip inside of a zip. So I think we leave that alone. This should create for us one file plus our PDB file. Now, if you're not familiar, a PDB file is used for debugging a production application. You probably should not give the end users your PDB file, but it's for you to debug that specific version of your application. It's kind of the hints or the translation file back to the source code for your compiled application. And you do need to make sure that you have the version from when it was built. So we'll have that in our library. We're not going to save it, but if you wanted to, you could publish to a separate PDB file server, or even to a separate storage account if you wanted to, or a separate container in your storage account. All right, so I think that's all we need for our build. So let's just save this. Let's not queue it. Then I'm going to go over to release. And in release, we're going to hit edit. And under code deployment, we have one task right now. Let's create another task. And I believe we search for storage. There you go, Azure file copy. So this copies files to Azure Blob Storage or virtual machines. So we want to do a file copy. You know what? We're going to need to have this build run, because it's going to want to look up that file. So let's hold off on this. I'm going to leave without changing, and I am going to, you know what? I'm going to have to edit it and turn off continuous deployment. Otherwise, what happens is it will automatically deploy based upon the pipeline being built, which I don't want, because I don't want to go through the whole pipeline build process. So let's run this pipeline, which will build our exact same, the last build we had, it's going to build that over again. But this will go through the process of rebuilding our application. That way, we'll have the right files to reference in our release application or release pipeline. So I'll show you what that means in just a minute. Let's let this run, and I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to come back to it once this is done, because this will take a few minutes. It looks like our job is now finalized. Let's go back here, and it says that it was successful, and we have 5 published, including our WPF drop, which in here we have a folder. Inside here we have our executable. Notice it's 89 megabytes, as well as our PDB file, but that's it. We have just 2 files. That's our entire application is inside that executable file. So again, it's bigger than we'd like, but at the same time, it's not massive, especially for all of our NuGet packages and everything else, as well as the entire .NET Core runtime. So 89 megabytes is our final build. So now I can go release. And because we have that executable file in there, we hit edit. We go to our one job, one task for the deployment or development deployment. We can add that. I search for storage, because Azure file copy. You might get other file copies there. But file copy, we're going to choose from our source. Our source is going to be, and this is where we wanted to have that build done first, because in here we have WPF drop. Inside of there, we have our executable file. I'm going to choose just that file and hit OK. This is going to be the source we're going to copy from, and then we can specify where we're going to copy it to. So first we specify our Azure subscription, and then the destination type is Azure Blob. And the storage account, we have our TimCo Storage. Container name, that is this name right here, applications. Now, if you don't have a container created, if you notice this little icon here, if you don't have a container created, it will create one for you. So make sure that you give the right name. Otherwise, you might find you have, let's just say, an application container next to your applications, plural, container, because you forgot the S. That's why I like to copy and paste. Now, this does explain here if you want to have virtual directories, which is something kind of new and a little quirky, but you can do inside of blob containers to try and kind of simulate that whole file share type thing. Then you can do that, and here's how you would do that with blob prefixes. But for us, we can leave everything else alone and hit save. And now our build is saved, and we can hit create release. Let's see what this does. Make sure that it does, in fact, publish out to our container. I'm going to refresh this just so you see there's no blobs in here. There's no kind of trickery going on here. We're going to watch this process go. And if it does, in fact, succeed, then it's going to copy that blob over to our container, in which case we'll be able to reference that or create a URL for that to then access and download it. Okay. Again, I'll pause the video here, let this run because it might run for a little bit here. And it failed with its error. The same one we saw last time because we're using the Linux job. Oops. Let's go ahead and hit edit, edit release, edit release pipeline. Let's go. There we go. So this code deployment right now, it is running on Ubuntu 18.0.4. We might be able to bump it up and get Linux, or PowerShell in here. I'm not sure, but what we can do is we can go back to our pipeline here, and we have our SQL deployment. We could actually put the job in this part of the pipeline if you wanted to. I think just to make this easy, I'm going to go over to this SQL deployment. We're going to change this to Windows-based deployment. And then we'll change this. Let's just say Windows deployment instead of Windows-based. And we'll call this one the Linux deployment. Then over here in our Windows deployment, we're going to add that task, which is an Azure file. Again, I can just see if I search for storage, I get just one thing. If I search for Azure file, I get multiple things. So in here, again, we're going to go through the process. It's good practice to do it again. Choose our subscription. Our destination is a blob. The storage is TimCo Storage. The container name, I believe it is still in my clipboard. So I'm going to leave that as it is. Go back to pipelines. Go back to the Linux deployment, and this I'm going to remove since it's not part of Linux. And then from here, it should be that everything's set up to be good to go. Let's just verify this agent is in fact Windows 2019, which it is. It does have PowerShell. We're all good to go. So we hit save, and we'll try this again. when you're building these pipelines, get used to the idea that you're going to run these and not get them right. Because even when you have step-by-step directions, which you won't have for your real application, it doesn't happen that way. But even if you had step-by-step directions, there's probably something that's a little bit different or a little bit off, or something's going on that's going to be a bit different, and that's going to cause you an issue. Embrace it. Don't get frustrated by it. Realize that it's going to happen. It's okay. Just take a step back, figure out what's going on, and learn from it, because doing so will help you grow for the next time. Now, I had forgotten that this first one was Linux because I saw code and SQL, and I didn't see Linux versus Windows, which is why I changed those names. But when I got the error, because we figured that out last time, this time I was like, oh, yeah, got that. That's just because it's a PowerShell issue, which PowerShell is not installed on Ubuntu 18.04. No problem. We can just move it over to the Windows build process or Windows publish process. We have one of those. So I was comfortable doing that very, very quickly because of the fact that I've already gone through the pain once of learning what that means and why it's happening that way. So when I say embrace the problems, please embrace the problems. Don't just try and get out of them. Because if you had just done a get out of jail free card, had somebody else fix it for you, post it on Stack Overflow and had somebody give you an answer, you probably won't remember it. And therefore you'll have it again. You'll have to have the same fix all over again, kind of learned all over again. So I'd recommend actually learn and go through this process. So we're already on the publish process for the both SQL and then also our blob copy. Let's go back to our application here. Just refresh again. Make sure there's no results. There's not. That means we haven't, started a copy of file over accidentally or something like that. So with this, we can wait for this data deploy to be done. I'll pause the video. This might take a few seconds. I'm not sure how long this one takes. But then we'll come back once the Azure blob file copy is hopefully done. And that didn't work. Like I said, expect problems. It's okay. So it says Azure blob file copy did not work. Frustratingly, this is the last task in the process, so we had to wait for it all to be done. But if we scroll down here and look, we get this upload to container failed with error azcopy.exe exited with a non-zero exit code while uploading file to blob storage. That tells us nothing. So if let's kind of zoom. We can't really zoom in here. Sorry. I'm gonna read this for you because it's important to kind of understand. If you scroll back through here, you can see the errors, and right up here it says authentication failed. Sorry, it's scrolling here. Authentication failed is either not correct, expired, or does not have the correct permission. Well, we didn't really authenticate. We're letting Azure Devops do that for us. But therein lies our problem. So let's see if we can fix that. So let's edit the pipeline. Let's go to actually, not even the pipeline. We need to figure out what this project is using as its ID. So you go to project settings, lower left-hand corner, project settings, and then in here we have the service connection, the lower under pipelines. And this is our enterprise. We have our ID here. So we manage service principal, which opens up an Azure Blade, which tells us here's the display name of the user that Azure DevOps is using to connect to Azure. Now, what this is doing is impersonating someone, and actually not impersonating, it is logging in as I am Tim Corey TimCo Retail Manager and then a GUID. That's the login of the Azure DevOps. And so that's what it's using when it's trying to connect to our Azure Storage account. Well, let's go back to our actual Azure Storage account and go to Access Control and go under Role Assignments. We can do a search. And if we do a search, we find that that comes up as a contributor. But I don't believe contributor is the right resource. It says it grants full access to manage all resources, but is not allowed to assign roles in Azure RBAC. Resource-based access control, maybe? I'm not positive. But let's add a role assignment. So we're going to select a role, and we're going to say we want storage blob data owner. So we own the data that we're going to work with. We're going to hit paste, and that's going to give us full access to the blob container and data, which will allow us to hopefully overwrite and also just to write to our data container. I did a search for my entry. I select it, and then I hit save. That's going to add this now contributor and storage blob data owner. Now, I'm not even sure that contributor is the same thing as storage blob data contributor. So let's just add that role to be sure. There is that contributor right here, which allows for read, write, and delete access for blob containers and data. That we're going to add as well. We might not have to add both of these. I'm going to add both of them because that's what's recommended, but you could try taking one away and see what happens. So now I've added those. Let's go back and just rerun. Let's see. We can close that one out. We can go back over here and we can rerun this. Let's go back to our release, and we'll create a new release and just say, hey, just trigger that. Notice it succeeded on Linux but failed on Windows, which is kind of cool. You have this breakdown and also tells you Linux versus Windows. That's what succeeded versus failed. This is running. It's been queued. And what I'm going to do is, again, pause the video. You don't need to watch all this. Once it's done, I'll come back. Hopefully we'll have a success message this time. Okay, so it looks like we have a completion success here. We have a one file copy. There's a, right here, it shows the copy of the file. So 0%, 27%, 82%, all the way through and it copied. We also see the number of transfers completed is 1, no failed or skipped. So it looks like we've got a success on this end. So we've got this, this nice green on both sides, which is awesome. We go back over to our container and we do a refresh. We see one file. So this is our file. It's 88.8 megabytes. And you'll see a little bit different size amount. So if you go over here to our pipeline and look at the latest version, if we go to the publish, and here we can open this up and see it says 89 megabytes, but over here it says 88.8. There's a rounding thing there. There's also the case of how big the blocks are for the storage to determine how many blocks it takes up. That can change the size of the file. The file itself isn't changing. It's just how it's being reported might change a little bit. So if you see slightly different numbers, that's okay. It's just how it's being reported. But now we have our executable file. We can click on this, and in here we have a URL. This URL is the URL for our file. So we can copy this and we can download this URL. Now notice there are versions, so if there's previous versions, we could see those. But this allows us to access this file. In fact, let's just paste this in. And that will work for you too if you want to download it. Right now, it's not going to do a whole lot for you, but you could download it. It's just a completed executable file, not the source code, obviously. But this is downloading. My internet's not the best right now, so it's going to take a little bit of time to download. But it's an 88.8 megabyte file that's downloading. We've got about 35 seconds to go. So that's the storage container. We can keep that URL. Notice the URL is timcostorage.blob.core.windows.net/applications/trmdesktopui.exe. So that's our URL from now on for our executable file. We can use that, and it will always give us the latest version of the file because we'll overwrite it. We're not going to keep older versions live. We're going to have only the latest version available to users. If you wanted to, you could create an archive version, something like that, but we're not going to. Let's show us in folder, and I'm going to refresh this here, and we have our trmdesktopui.exe. Notice it says 90.935 megabytes or 90,935 kilobytes. Like I said, a little bit different. But if you right click and go to properties, you'll see this file came from another computer, might be blocked to help protect this computer. Unblock that and apply. That will allow you to run this executable file without issues. Hopefully your antivirus might not like it the first time. We're not using code signing, so that's a problem. But there we go. We have our executable up and running. We can log in, we can exit. If we try and log in though, we're gonna get an error message because we didn't change the web.config or app.config to point to the right URL, the right server for this. Probably I believe if I started up my API locally, this would probably actually run, but not ideal, obviously. We want to point to our actual API, which that's what we're going to do starting next time. We're going to work on tweaking that config file. Because right now, like I said, it's app.config, even though it's a WPF core project. So we're going to switch over to appsettings.json instead. But that's a whole thing because it's .NET Core or WPF core, which means we have to bring in app settings a little differently. And we're not using the built-in .NET Core dependency injection. So we have to work with that as well. So there's a few things we have to do, but we'll do those in the next video. But for now, we have our executable deployed to Azure Storage. Like I said, it's going to cost us pennies at most to store this and deploy it. And we can publish this out if we wanted to the world, and they could download our file if we wanted it to go that broadly. All right, so that's the video for today. Leave questions and comments down below in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And as always, I am Tim Corey.